Welcome to today's CGS webinar, Preparing Your Institution's NIGMS Predoctoral Training Grant Proposal. We're delighted to have Dr. Allison Gammey with us today. She is Director of the Division of Training, Workforce Development, and Diversity at the National Institutes of Health. And she is responsible for supporting the Institute's research training, career development, and diversity building activities through a number of programs at the undergraduate, graduate, postdoctoral, and faculty level. Before we get started today, I am going to give a quick overview of the plan. The presentation will run approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and the slides and recording will be available to all participants after the webinar. If you want to ask a question at the end of the presentation, you can submit any questions through the GoToWebinar control panel, which is indicated on your screen. And if you have any technical issues, you can get troubleshooting help at the link indicated. If you're having trouble hearing us, you can try switching to a different audio connection, changing from telephone to mic and speakers or vice versa. And if you have trouble with your telephone connection, you can click problem dialing in for a different telephone number to dial. There is a close-up of the place on your screen where you can type in questions at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Gammey to tell us about this exciting new solicitation and the changes upcoming in the new predoctoral training grant proposal guidelines.
Yes, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess we can go to the next slide and just jump on in. Just to put this funding announcement into a little bit of context, we're not exactly the first people who have been interested in bringing about changes in graduate education. In fact, there have been a large number of publications ranging from sort of more measured calls for change to ones that range to fix the, reform the PhD system or close it down. So you know there's a large amount of conversation and thought being put into sort of revitalizing or changing or having new effects on biomedical graduate education. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what are some of the major issues in training? And I'm just going to highlight a few. Obviously, there are many. If we go to the next slide, you can see, and we all know this, that the face of biomedical research has changed significantly over time. If you just look at the number of structures, sequences, publications available in databases, they've gone through exponential increase in volume. So the way we taught in, let's say, the 70s is really, we've got to really change the way we teach because just the amount of information out there is different and of a large volume. Can we have the next slide, please? Another major issue in science, and I know we're all aware of this, is the issue of reproducibility. And many publications have come out on this, and you know that NIH in particular has taken an interest in ensuring rigor and reproducibility in the research grants. But we also think there's an important space in training for the issue of rigor and reproducibility. Next slide, please. Another significant issue are some of the conflicts in the research incentive structure, such that faculty members at institutions are under tremendous pressure to produce results. And because of this, many graduate students feel as though they're being used as workforce rather than as being treated as trainees. And these are just some photographs of some of the demonstrations across campuses where it's reached such a level that students are demonstrating and protesting and hoping to organize. Next slide, please. Another aspect that has changed significantly over time is the career landscape. And the number of trainees that are in the pathway and what kinds of opportunities they have. So what you can see by this graph is that the tenure track positions, which have sometimes been held up as this sort of gold standard career option, has changed significantly such that there are a range of other careers for the limited number of slots for the tenure track position. Next slide, please. This slide shows another issue that's important in biomedical, the biomedical research workforce, and that is that although you have excellent representation of women shown in the orange bars and underrepresented minorities shown in the lighter colored bars, at the associate's and bachelor's level, as you start to move through up the scale in terms of degree attainment and then transitioning into careers in academia, you can see a significant loss of talent over time, such that women and underrepresented minorities are lost, particularly at the associate professor and full professor level. Next slide, please. And what this translates to, if you look at the data from the U.S. Census in 2010 and see certain minority groups are shown in the colorful bars at the top, if you look at the demographics of NIH trainees or NIH principal investigators, you can see once again that there's severe underrepresentation of certain groups, in particular African Americans, Native American, Native Hawaiian, and Hispanic individuals. Next slide, please. All right, so what is NIH doing to address these issues? If I could have the next slide, please. One of the things we're doing here at NIGMS is providing funds to the community to develop training modules around the areas of rigor and reproducibility. We also have put money towards career development for the multiple careers that are available to current trainees, and also awards to develop skills for skills development. So all of these funded awards, we have a synopsis on the NIGMS webpage if you're interested in seeing what your peers have come up with as interesting approaches to addressing these issues in training. Could I have the next slide, please? Another thing that's going on at NIH are the BEST Awards. And so these, again, are kind of experiments trying to figure out how best to prepare trainees for the multiple careers in the biomedical research workforce and what kind of skills they need to transition into these careers. And I think what will be great as the BEST Awards award sites start producing publications of their findings, we should be able to disseminate some of their lessons learned and in terms of effective practices. Could I have the next slide, please? Another important area of focus at NIH is increasing diversity in the scientific workforce. And recently there was an office put in place, the Office of the Director of Scientific Workforce Diversity, and we have a Chief Officer of Scientific Workforce Diversity, Hannah Valentine. And she is working hard to bring diversity both to the intramural program at NIH and also thinking about what we can do in the extramural community as well. Next slide, please. The extramural NIH webpage has put up a really nice diversity website. In particular, you can find out either if you're a principal investigator wanting to find what kinds of awards are available trans NIH for diversity-focused programs, or if you're a trainee wanting to see what opportunities are available, there's a nice portal through the extramural diversity webpage. Next slide, please. All right, now I'd like to talk specifically and for the rest of my time about what we're doing at NIGMS, specifically with regard to the T32 predoctoral training program. And I do just want to emphasize, in case it hasn't been clear, that we're talking about just the PhD level T32. We're currently working on, and probably we hope to release next year, an MD PhD T32 funding announcement, but for now this is just, what I'm talking about in this talk is just the PhD level. All right, so our goal with this funding announcement was to really try to bring about, to catalyze some change in biomedical graduate education. And what we want to do is to ensure that our training programs are keeping pace with the rapid evolution of biomedical research. It's not our intention that you should layer on new things onto existing structures, but really just rethink the process. And you can obviously preserve the best elements, but this is an opportunity to really reconfigure and streamline and try to find the most effective way to train the next generation of scientists. Next slide, please. We're in a position to have a reasonable impact in that NIGMS funds over half of the T32 trainees at NIH. You can see we're represented on the graph by GM, and you can see that we're a significant funder of predoctoral trainees in the biomedical sciences. Next slide, please. All right, so what we're hoping to do with this funding announcement is to really kind of switch things around where the main emphasis is on the trainee and the trainee's sort of skill development. And these skills can range from the technical to the operational to the professional. And in particular, we want to make sure that the trainees are given the skills they need to transition into the range of careers in the biomedical research workforce. As I mentioned from the introductory slides, we're very concerned about rigor and transparency, and we want to ensure that that becomes sort of threaded through the entire program. So it's not just some little short module, but it's actually integral to graduate training, that it's really focused on them becoming rigorous scientists who produce research that is reproducible. We're also concerned that that things such as the responsible conduct of research and safety in the laboratory, these are things that really should be reinforced and stressed throughout the training program as well. And finally, because we think that diversity is integral to excellence in training, we really want to see that diversity and inclusion are infused throughout the training experience as well. As I mentioned, the community has loud and clear let us know that there are really some conflicts in the research incentive structure, and we want to ensure that our trainees are being treated as trainees rather than workforce. So we would also like to see that the faculty are selected not just based on research excellence, that's sort of the sufficient condition, but the necessary condition, but we really want to see that they have a commitment to training as well. So it's not necessarily about selecting the most famous or the most faculty member with the most accolades, but really the ones who are committed to training. We also think it's important to take diversity into consideration when building the team, and this can range from what level they are, whether they're starting faculty or seasoned faculty. This can also be diversity in the sense of gender balance and also in terms of race and ethnicity. We also want to see that there's mentor training oversight throughout the program. And specifically, another kind of shift for this funding announcement is that it's similar to, in some levels, to a research grant, where we want to see that there are obtainable and measurable training objectives in alignment with the scientific discipline. We want to see that there's data collected on the success and failures of the interventions, educational interventions, and we really encourage the dissemination of the intervention outcomes as well as posting career outcomes on publicly available sites. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're really trying to switch the focus from it being kind of about the training program and the training setting to it being about giving skills and training students. So we really want to emphasize students at the center of the training programs rather than just the research environment. Next slide, please. And we'd like to see that they're given a set of skills, and I'm going to read these out, but basically it's just about making sure that they have a broad understanding across biomedical disciplines and that they have the skills to independently acquire knowledge needed to advance their field, that they can think critically, independently, and identify important biomedical research questions and approaches that push forward the boundaries of their area of study. Next slide, please. We want to see that they have a strong foundation in scientific reasoning, rigorous research design, experimental methods, quantitative approaches, as well as data analysis and interpretation. We want to see that they're given that they have the commitment to approaching and conducting biomedical research responsibly and with integrity, and experience initiating, conducting, interpreting, and presenting rigorous and reproducible biomedical research with increasing self-direction. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the professional skills, we'd like to see that they can work effectively in teams with colleagues from a variety of cultural and scientific backgrounds, and to promote inclusive and supportive scientific research environments. That they have the skills to teach and communicate scientific research methodologies and findings to a wide variety of audiences, and the knowledge, professional skills, and experiences required to identify and transition into careers in the biomedical research workforce. Next slide, please. So in terms of the program plan, in the area of rationale, mission, objectives, and the overall training plan, as I mentioned, we want to see a rationale. We want to see a solid training record for the program. We want to see that there's a mission and objectives, and these objectives should be specific and measurable. We want to see how the training activities will build skills and attain objectives. We want to see plans for using evidence-based training activities. I want to explain how differences in backgrounds will be accommodated, and how this will enhance the training environment beyond just the supported trainees. And for multidisciplinary programs, we want to see how the training program is integrated across the various departments. And always importantly, we want to see the distinctions from, but the synergies with other NIGMS funded T32 programs. Next slide, please. In the area of career preparation, we'd like to see posted outcomes for trainees. We'd like to see that trainees are introduced to a range of careers in the biomedical research workforce, and that they're provided with the skills they need. And this can even be in the form of experiential learning in terms of internships, shadowing, or informational interviews. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we really like to see program oversight. We want to see that the trainees are taken care of throughout their PhD experience and not just during the time they're on the training grant. We want to see that the program faculty have been selected based on commitment to training and mentoring. We'd like to see mentor training provided to faculty, and we want to ensure that the trainees are placed in research environments that promote responsible conduct of research as well as rigor and transparency. We'd like to also see mechanisms for matching the mentors and mentees, that it's a thoughtful process, and that the mentees are given information about how to do the selection process. And we want to make sure that there's monitoring of the mentor-mentee relationships, and that there are plans for removing faculty that show poor mentorship qualities from the training program. Next slide, please. We'd also like to see a strong institutional commitment, and these are just some of the areas that might be the form that it could take. This includes ensuring that rigor and responsible research is conducted and valued, that there's startup and bridging funds that are available to ensure training continuity, that they provide support staff and research infrastructure, potentially giving protected time to faculty for training and mentoring, that we would like to see that training and mentoring are valued in tenure and promotion decisions, that the institution provides safe and accessible facilities, that they will guarantee the support of trainees throughout their time in graduate school, beyond just the time they're funded in the training grant, and that they support the evaluation of the training and mentoring activities. And finally, we need some institutional reinforcement that there's no overlap in the training mechanisms. Next slide, please. The principal investigator, what we'd like to see beyond them being an expert in the scientific area proposed for the training program, like to see records of leadership, conducting rigorous research. We want to make sure that they have the time commitment to give over to this program, that they should be trained in mentoring practices, and also that they're committed to and have training in the areas of diversity and inclusion. We actually would like to encourage a multiple PI model for these awards, where the PIs have complementary expertise and bring something that will enhance the training experience. For example, in terms of having institutional supports, you might like to have an institutional leader, such as a dean. In terms of the evidence-based teaching and mentoring practices, it might be worthwhile to have a principal investigator who understands the science of education. Potentially, you could have social scientists who might be interested in studying some psychosocial interventions that you'd be interested in implementing. Next slide, please. We want to see in terms of the program faculty that there are sufficient numbers to support the program, that they have funding, and that they have expertise in the area. We want to make sure they have the bandwidth and commitment to training, that they're going to provide opportunities for trainees to initiate, conduct, and interpret and present their research with increasing self-direction. Again, that they have a commitment to training and mentoring, that they will actively promote the career development of their trainees, and that diversity will be considered when building the faculty mentor team. It's also important to see that the faculty are cooperative and they interact and they're collaborative to provide a positive training environment for the students. Next slide, please. For the trainees, it's important to justify the slot number and to explain the appointment process. We really want to encourage the recruitment and appointing of trainees from diverse backgrounds, and that these students have the potential to becoming outstanding scientists. Along those lines, we'd really like to encourage a holistic review process when accepting and appointing students to see that they have research potential and that with training they can become successful. We also emphasize a retention plan that has oversight throughout the entire time of the trainees in the graduate program. Next slide, please. For the training record or outcomes, although these will all be new applications coming in, most programs will have at least some track record of having graduated previous students. We want to see things such as completion and time to degree. We'd also like to see whether there's a differential between well-represented and underrepresented students. I want to see that there is evidence of research activity from the trainees, but this includes not necessarily top-tier journals, but just solid peer-reviewed papers and presentations at meetings and such to show that they have conducted rigorous research. Plans for career tracking, and then there's some kind of evaluation, outcome, and dissemination plans in place, and that the program will be responsive to the outcomes of these evaluations and implement changes in response. Next slide, please. For the evaluation, we want to make sure that the evaluations really test whether or not the objectives are being met. This is very similar to specific aims in a grant, where you put forth the specific aims and then have to have a means to ensure that you're measuring and meeting those goals. So we also would like to see how the program has been or will be responsive to feedbacks from assessments and to have plans for career tracking. Next slide, please. So to end, the overall impact score really will have to do with whether this program is likely to produce a diverse pool of well-trained scientists that have the skills necessary to conduct rigorous and reproducible research and transition into careers in the biomedical research workforce. The skills range from the technical to the operational and the professional. Next slide, please. So the timeline for this, you know that the announcement has just come out. The first application receipt dates will be in May of 2018. The initial review will occur in October, November. It will go to the NIGMS Council in January of 2019, and then the earliest award date is July of 2019. So with that, I'll end and be happy to take any questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Allison. We've had a number of questions come in. The first one has to do, there are several having to do with eligibility. So does the PI for these grants need to have an NIH grant in hand to be eligible to apply? And if so, what kind?
That's really a great question. I think that the main issue of having at least one person be a scientist in the discipline, let's say if it's a bioinformatics or a biostatistics training program, you want to have a biostatistician on as a principal investigator. They need to have been research active, but I think that, and of course, these are reviewed by peers, and so they may look more highly upon people who are currently being funded. But I think if the point we're trying to say is to make a strong case that training is what is important here, and if this is the best person at the institution to train the students, I think that they should make a strong case for that. So it's more, from our perspective, the real goal is about training, and it's not about how, some could argue that certain individuals may be respected in the field, but they don't have the bandwidth to do the training to be the principal investigator. So it's a balance.
Thank you. I guess related, there's a question about really young PhD programs. In one case, my PhD program started last year. Are we still eligible? Does that give a sufficient record, in other words, of success in supporting trainees?
Yeah, I think the nice thing is that, people are coming in, everybody's coming in new, and I think there is an understanding, just like that it is for early stage investigators, that maybe preliminary data is you can have a more nuanced approach to how much preliminary data is needed. So I think that it's important to come in and give it a shot. I think that if it's a brand new program, maybe if it's faculty that are being drawn from other programs, they can at least say, well, we have previous track record in other programs or something like that. But it's understood that if it's a brand new program, you're not going to have outcomes for quite some time. So I'm not sure if that really answered the question, but I think please don't discount yourself from the process if you're a new program. We would encourage new programs.
All right, thank you. This next question, I think, is a version of one that you've gotten before, and it is: should trainees have a formal course in rigor and reproducibility?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I think that each site has to really decide how they want to take this issue on, and potentially a course could be, just the beginning of the conversation that will occur throughout graduate school, and I don't think it hurts to really address the issue and address, what are some of the areas that have caused research not to be reproducible in terms of variability of cell lines and not verifying cell lines, or there are some big issues that have been discussed in the area of rigor and reproducibility, and I don't think it hurts to have a formalized course on it. But then what we really want to see is that it's integrated throughout and it's reinforced by faculty in their research labs, and that this is an important part of the training process throughout. So as long as it doesn't turn into something that's like a checkbox, we've done it and now everybody, we're done. We kind of want to avoid that, but it's certainly, I can imagine a really exciting, interesting course centered around it and doing so. Yeah.
So am I reading you right, Allison, that if a proposal said that requiring students to submit articles to journals would not be sufficient training in rigor and reproducibility, or that would look kind of thin from your perspective?
Oh, you mean just having students submit papers? Sorry if I missed that question.
Well, I think another version of this question is, aren't students getting this anyway through the process of being involved in research and producing it for publication? You're looking for something more formal?
Well, I think that is the problem is, and I think in an ideal world, if the trainee really is deeply involved in all aspects of the kind of experimental design and data collection, data analysis, the writing up of it, the kind of understanding issues around statistical power. If there really are deeply involved, but unfortunately some trainees are just some small part of publications, and they're not necessarily being educated in the broad range of issues that go into a final publication. And so I think that it has to be more, there has to be a safeguard that trainees are getting the full understanding of what it is to do rigorous and reproducible research, and that publications alone they're not sufficient proof that they have themselves have a deep understanding of the issues.
Got it. Thanks. So next question, what does sufficient numbers of program faculty mean, and what does overlap in training mechanisms mean? Sure.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. It's hard when you do these slides. It's a little, you kind of do the abbreviated version. What that means is if you're proposing to have a 20 student program, you want 20 slots, and you have 5 faculty, that's probably, not potentially the best ratio. So, you just want to say if you're, or let's say you want to do I'm going to go back to biostatistics. If you want a biostatistics training program and you only have 1 faculty member who's a biostatistician, so it's just meaning that the scientific expertise is there in sufficient numbers to support, to interact with, and to form a training community for the number of slots that you've requested.
Great.
And then the other question was, sorry, forgot.
Let's see. I think that it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have
from our screen. So I think it had to do, you addressed sufficient numbers of faculty and overlap, I believe that was.
Oh, overlap. Yeah, sure. Sorry. Okay, so overlap would mean that you have, let's say, some institutions have multiple NIGMS programs, and we just want to make sure that they have distinct training objectives. So if you could just substitute out the name, if basically if the training programs and the scientific training are completely overlapping, that we really would rather see those 2 programs merge and come in under 1 program. So we just don't want it to be that we want to catalyze scientific training in a number of areas, but we don't want there to be overlap. However, we would love to see synergies. So the synergies can include the non-scientific training pieces. So for example, career development or professional skills development, or even tracking and outcomes, and even some forms of climate surveys or evaluations or other such things, or taking a scientific approach to training and mentoring interventions. There could be synergies there, but then there just should be scientific training distinct goals and objectives.
All right, thank you. The next person has a question about what is meant by evidence-based training. Does this mean using best practices in training? In other words, designing training based on past successes, or evaluating training as it is ongoing?
Okay, so yeah, those are great questions. So, I mean, evidence-based has kind of come to mean basically how do we know that what we did helped people learn? And so was this the most effective way that we could attain our training objectives? So you may and sort of what has come out of this sort of evidence-based literature is that for many students, the traditional lecture format and then taking an exam is really not the most effective way for people to learn the material. There tends to be quite a bit of evidence that active learning of any form is more effective for long-term learning. And so I think what you're going to find is there's been this kind of revolution in undergraduate training that's happened, and it's been going on for a while. And, pretty soon you're going to have full cohorts of students who really were not trained in the lecture format or more traditional methods, and they're used to the more active learning format. So I think that we just have to both keep pace scientifically with changes, but also educationally as well. So there's a pretty large literature out there about what kinds of mechanisms are effective for teaching and learning. So that's sort of what it's, again, and then moving towards a scientific approach. So you can say you'd really like to test whether a certain teaching intervention is effective. You can use the simple tools of the kind of standards are pre and post analyses or even midway through the course, just kind of assessing skills development and attaining learning goals. So it's sort of just moving towards the idea that you can't assume that what you're doing is the most effective way to teach, and so you just have to measure that.
Mm-hmm. This may be yet another reason for universities to be excited to see what kinds of publications come out of the BEST projects, I imagine.
Right, exactly.
What has been learned there. So here's another question. How is the applicant pool evaluated for new programs? What counts as an acceptable applicant pool?
Sorry, you're saying this, I'm sorry if I missed the first part. What, the applicant pool of the training, or the applicant pools of the grants or applications, or, sorry, say that again?
I'm not sure, looking at the question again. Perhaps the person who asked the question can follow up by clarifying that, and we can move on to the next question in the meantime. So the next question is, are you planning to make changes in the study section reviewers to ensure that these newer emphases will be appropriately evaluated?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, the nice thing is that these are reviewed at NIGMS, and what we are hoping to do is to do significant training of the study section, first of all, step one, but we're also want to bring in people that have expertise outside of just having run a T32 program. We want to see people who have understanding of evidence-based mentoring practices, teaching practices, people who have experience, for example, in the career preparation realm. So we want to make sure that the expertise matches what the things that we're asking. So yeah, we have a good year to work on ensuring that we've recruited a diverse panel that is ready to think about these range of issues.
All right, thank you. How many grants will be funded?
Well, we don't have any change in the budget. The budget is, at least we hope, we don't, as much as we can say, we don't have plans to decrease or increase it. So a lot will depend on slots requested and, various factors. So we have a certain number of slots across all of our T32 mechanisms. It's 3,000 slots, but that includes the MSTP as well. But so we're going to keep the slots the same, but programs range from 4 students to 40. So it really depends on the sizes and the number. So it's kind of hard to say. And and remember, you only come in when you are coming in at the end of an award, or new applicants are welcome in any cycle. But in terms of the turnover, it's not going to be immediate either.
Right. And what type of support can be requested? Does it include tuition, stipend, research supplies?
Yeah, that's right. That's the standard. It's mainly stipend and tuition. These are sorry, I didn't really give the more nuts and bolts aspect of that, but if people have specific questions, I think what I probably should have said right at the beginning is please contact us. We'll get you in touch with the right program officer who can really help you think about your program and shape it. And they can help you with the range of questions about, what kinds of money can be requested. And we are plan on doing multiple webinars coming up, starting probably in the winter. We don't want to confuse people who are coming in for the January submission date, but maybe as soon as that's done, we're going to start doing a lot of informational webinars to help applicants.
Thanks. Here's another question. What are the ideal years in which trainees should be funded?
So we like to fund in the earlier years, and the reasoning there is that that's when a lot of the intensive training occurs, and then students tend to transition into the laboratory, although we hope that training will continue obviously throughout. So we have tended to fund in the earlier years.
Got it.
Other training grants and other institutes and centers sometimes will fund the later years, though.
All right. Next question. Only a small fraction of students supported by NIGMS are supported by a T32. Is NIGMS planning any oversight or changes in training requirements for students supported via other types of grant?
Well, right now, so I guess are you talking about research grants there or other?
It doesn't, the question doesn't indicate.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, you can only really have oversight for what you're directly funding, but our hope is that this has a larger halo effect on we would love to bring about institutional change. And so we would love to see that trainees who are not directly supported by the award will benefit from the training activities, and because we would like to have a larger impact, institutional impact. There is a mechanism within the application and also even within the training tables where you can talk about the affiliated students. So they're not training grant supported, but they're basically, part of the larger program or initiative. So you're able to talk about those student successes as well. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it's hard for us to have a negative oversight, for something that we haven't funded directly. But just to address that point, they're trying at least on some level with the research grants, if you have trainees that requiring my IDP, my individual development plan, to see that at least to begin to start to put some responsibility on the principal investigator for looking out for the training and the career path of the R01, for example, supported trainees.
All right. The next question is, do you review the research plans as part of the proposal review process?
The research plans of the principal investigators? I'm not sure what
I'm afraid that I'm not able to
clarify
based on what I have, but that perhaps you could address it as best you can.
Sure, I'll try. I think that actually what, obviously you want that science and science training is integral to the whole application process. So we really want to know that that's a rich environment, training environment for the student in that scientific area. So it is certainly a consideration, and I can't emphasize that enough. That's sort of step one. The problem is in the past that tended to be the only condition, that it was only whether or not it was research active in that area, and that was considered necessary and sufficient. But now we're just saying that's necessary, but it's not sufficient for an optimal training environment.
Thank you. We are slowing down with the questions, and so I think we'll, just when I say that, another one comes in. Given the specific new requirements for additional professional development opportunities and internship experiences, does NIGMS plan to increase funding within T32 budgets for travel and training related expenses to account for these additional opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is an excellent question, and honestly, I think that's something that we could be open to. At the moment, we kept that amount the same that it's been in the past, but I think that's something we're open to thinking about, particularly if the program has a well-justified plan. So that's a point well taken. It's something we've been thinking about. We've also, we're also trying to think about potentially creative ways to fund trainees for shorter periods of time later in the pathway so they can take part in experiential learning. So we're definitely thinking about these things and appreciate the question, and understand that we're open to rethinking things.
All right. This next question is sort of in the same vein. With the additional requirements for assessment and graduate follow-up, would you be willing to increase administrative support?
So I think, it's always a dilemma. I think that on some level, if you do that, and any of these things we do, means fewer slots. So we have to fund fewer students. And I think that one of the things that we hope we've made clear, but potentially we need to do more on this regard, is that if you could get the institution to support that is a sign of strong institutional support, which should go well in the scored review criteria where we want to see institutional support. So we hope that this on some level will empower principal investigators to go to their institutions and say, this would really look good if you gave us support to do the evaluations. But at the moment, the structure is the same as it was before, where the funding is primarily for the trainees. But again, we are open to input from the community, and we have to hear how this plays out. So we welcome your input going forward.
Thank you. And here the questions keep rolling in. When you mentioned synergy, are you referring to integrating existing T32s?
So integrating them, so coming in together, like consolidating? Is that how you're reading the question too? I mean, we're very open to consolidating, where maybe two programs realize that their training objectives are actually kind of converging. We would be happy to see them merge.
Okay. Here's an interesting,
really, in the sense that really we're all about kind of being more efficient, and if it's more efficient in terms of, tracking and assessing and other administrative pieces of it, it makes a lot of sense to merge.
All right. Here's the next question. It always seems difficult to develop a one-size-fits-all instructional program when individual trainee career goals can be quite different. Would it be reasonable to develop various training opportunities that were available to trainees based on the goals in their personal IDPs, but not required of all T32 funded students?
I think I understood it until the very last part. I think that it's a great idea to have individualized plans for the trainees, and I think this is some of the exciting thing that's happening in the BEST program as well, is a kind of space for students to really think through their individual career options, and then they actively work to develop the skills that they're going to need to transition into that career. So it is clearly going to be kind of independent pathways. I think certainly if you see that trainees are headed into, certain career paths at a reasonable rate, it might make sense to consolidate. But, I think these are really, the thing is we're really open to creative ideas on the part of the grantee, the applicants, to come up with interesting, innovative ways to help trainees as they transition through. So, I'm sure there's a million great ideas out there in terms of career preparation, trainee development.
All right. And then the next question has to do with integrating an internship program into the early years of a PhD program when there are other curricular demands. How could this be done without putting a risk on time to degree? Is there, do you have any guidance for how that might be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that the best program is learning is that I think the first fear of most principal investigators, faculty, is that if you add anything on, it will increase the time to degree. But I think what they're finding is that when students have a focus and a purpose and they know where they're headed, they get there faster. If they're feeling kind of lost and not sure what the next step is, that's when you start to see things stretch out a bit. So I'm really excited to see that data because I think that will be helpful and maybe reassuring for some programs as they try to put things in place. But, you know, again, I think it's something that can be measured. That's something that you can really look at and say, wow, it actually shortened the time to degree, or it had no change, or it lengthened it. So I think it's worth measuring. But preliminary data suggests that it doesn't lengthen the time to degree. So the other thing, just to go back to a point I at least tried to make, we don't necessarily want things to just be added on top of existing structures. So maybe restructuring things a bit so that it's just not another thing tacked on for the trainees to do, but maybe something can be reduced in time, you know, based on, again, evidence. If it's proving not to be an effective educational module, for example, then maybe it could be substituted. Something else could be substituted in.
All right. So it does really seem that we're slowing down on the questions now. Is there anything else that you would like to say about this program or advice that you'd like to share before we conclude?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we just want to say is that we want to encourage people who might have maybe counted themselves out, thinking that they wouldn't be competitive. I think we want to encourage a range of institution types and perspectives and training ideas from a whole range of institutions. So I know that some people have been very encouraged because they just felt kind of they could never be competitive against highly research active departments, and we just want to say that we know that excellence in graduate education can occur at a range of institution types. So encouraging people to apply and not sort of counting themselves out. I also want to really reiterate that to contact us, make sure we get you in touch with the right program officer, let you know whether your training mission is, whether your scientific training area is within the NIGMS mission before you get started. That's kind of step one, just to make sure, and then get you in touch with the right people and keep on the lookout for webinars that are going to be upcoming. I think I also want to say that I'm kind of taking the show on the road, and I will be in the Boston area in December, and the Bay Area in December, the Mid-Atlantic in November, and the Southeast maybe next week. So if you're in any of those areas and you'd like to hear about where I'm going to be, I'd be happy to send out the information.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Allison, for your time and the information, which I know is going to be helpful to a lot of CGS member universities. I'd like to thank all of you for participating in the audience and remind you that the webinar recording and slides will be emailed within a week. The next CGS webinar coming up is in November, on November 8th. On broadening PhD professional development in the humanities. So we hope you will join us for that as well. So thank you and have a great weekend and great rest of the day.